All right. Hello, everybody. You see that screen okay?
Yes.
All right. I am John McClelland. I just retired from the National Park Service as the fuels prescribed fire tech there. Worked there for 36 years and spent quite a bit of time pile burning up in the Bald Hills. Retired for 1 month and then realized retirement wasn't for me. So I have now 2 jobs, seasonal jobs. And the cool thing is I can actually do some pile burning at both jobs. So I'm happy to be here and help you guys out. I'm going to be talking about pile burning fundamentals, the benefits of pile burning, what materials to burn and what materials not to burn, how to build a pile, which is probably the most important topic we're going to discuss, what to wear, which is your personal protective equipment, what tools to have with you, what resources to have for single and multiple piles. And then I added my lessons learned just to kind of share some of the things I've learned over the years about pile burning. So benefits of pile burning, it really can be the simplest and safest and certainly the most cost-effective way to remove vegetation. And that's probably the most true statement you're going to find on here. It's standard method for burn prep. If you're preparing some acreage on your property to burn, a broadcast burn, cut, pile, and burn is a common method. Creating shaded fuel breaks. If you have a large piece of property and you want to build a defendable area, a shaded fuel break, very common for that. Restoration projects. I know in Humboldt County, cutting conifers and oak woodlands is pretty popular. It's good for that. And it's a common treatment method among contractors. If you got a grant, contractors certainly know cut, pile in the treatment. And it's just an easy way to remove hazard fuels for small landowners. So because of our storms in the last month, I've had at home a neighbor's tree that came into my property that has now been cut up and all burned. So I pile burned that. And then at work, the same storm brought down the top of a redwood and a single pile burned up all the debris from that. So a couple examples. Burning isn't the only treatment that you can do. Other treatment methods would be chipping, but chipping is costly. You know, you have to rent a chipper, pay for fuel. The fuel that you're going to chip needs to be near the chipper, or you need to get the chipper near the fuel. Chipping, unless you're going to remove it, if you're just blowing it over the landscape, it can reduce nitrogen in the top couple inches of the soil. It normally requires more than one person to operate. Lop and scatter, like in the photo at the bottom. Basically, if you've got a lot of debris to cut, and you scatter it around, you're just taking something living and turning into red slash and covering over an area. If you're going to do a broadcast burn through there, the fire intensities are really going to be high, and it's really labor intensive to lop and scatter. If you were to pile and leave, that's a method we've done in the park on large acreage areas. For wildlife piles, that's fine. But it may not be appropriate for small landowners. And as the pile cures, it's available to burn for a long period of time. I just wanted to point out two burn permits that are available here in Humboldt County. Standard burn permit for landowners with small acreage like myself. I have a ½ acre. The standard burn permit is for a 4-foot diameter pile, 1 pile, and you're limited, of course, to burn just vegetation generated from your property. And the non-standard permit is for a larger pile or multiple piles. May require a smoke management plan if you're near a smoke sensitive area. And again, you're supposed to only burn vegetation generated on your property. So what's not allowed? This is from the California Air Resource Board. There's just a whole laundry list of things there not to burn. It's really common sense. You know, you're not going to want to burn industrial waste or rubber or synthetic or I mean, they don't have nuclear stuff in there. I'm surprised they don't mention that, but you know, it comes down to common sense. So considerations for pile locations. If you're burning under a canopy and you're building piles, typically smaller piles so that you don't generate too much heat to scorch the crown or the boles of the tree. Should be made under canopy openings and away from the bole of leaf trees. And in dense stands, select the best open area to burn one pile and then feed with other piles nearby. That's a method that we use a lot. It limits the burn scars from piles, just to have multiple piles and then just light one and then feed it. You also have a lot of control over fire intensities when you do that. Piles may take a little bit longer to dry, so you might have to just plan for that. And then in an open area, piles can be larger. I typically like larger piles. They're easier to light and better consumption. They certainly will dry faster. So after treatment, you may be able to burn those piles sooner. Typically easier to access because you're not climbing through the trees or to get to your piles. There may not be a lot of stobs from your cutting. One consideration, though, kind of a heads up, is the surrounding fuel may be dry. So, you know, you want to make sure that there's no chance of escape when you light those piles. If you're near a road, certainly easy access to get to your piles. It may be the only option if you're treating an area above the road, like in this picture. We were creating a defendable area on a burn unit and it was really steep slope. So we just brought things down to the road to burn. It's not a great option if you're near a public road. I've got a few stories about smoking the road out because you need to consider the smoke impacts. If your material is a little bit wet and it produces a lot of smoke, you definitely don't want to smoke out a public road. This is kind of something that we employ at the park. You don't want to put your piles in the inboard ditch. One is if it rains, it could fill up with water. And two, if you're near a culvert crossing and that culvert is plastic, you've got problems. Plastic culverts are really easy to light. Don't ask me how I know that. And you may need to post warning signs the day of your burn in case there are smoke, chances for smoke, and just to alert the public from driving by. If you're near structures, you know, it's really going to vary where you put your pile. Like the photo on the right, you know, an old 150-year-old bunkhouse with old growth redwood on it. We want to make sure that that pile is quite a ways away. If you have water on site, you may want to set up a portable pump or have some type of water just as a contingency. And again, you may want to start a fire, a small fire, and then feed it with the majority of your slash, just so you can control the fire intensities. All right, so how to build a pile. This is kind of the meat right here. And I'll just say it's best to lay all the cut materials side by side and parallel to the slope. I never deviate from that. So that's the fundamental way to build a pile. I don't build teepees. I don't do cross hatching or laying it in a grid. It's always the materials are parallel to each other and then parallel to the slope. Don't cross the material as you're building your pile. You really want your pile to be compact. And if you start crossing material, you'll generate holes and gaps in your pile, which will hinder consumption. And then if you're going to cover your pile, well, let me first talk about, I usually limit the material going into a pile to 6 feet. And if you're covering the pile, leave at least a quarter to a third of the vegetation so that you can cover with your plastic or paper. And I like larger piles better than small piles. 6 foot high pile, by the time it's ready to burn, will be about 4 feet high because of the vegetation is going to continue to kind of decompose and compact. So it may look like a really tall, big pile, but it's going to shrink in size. So I just wanted to show you a really crummy pile. I don't even know if that's a pile, but that's just an example of what you don't want to be left with, or show up at someone's property or your own and go, oh, I'm supposed to burn that? That's just really wrong. So what to wear? Natural fibers like cotton or wool, long sleeve, long pants, leather gloves, eye protection, hard hat if you're in a canopy, leather boots with Vibram soles. Don't go out with sneakers. Yeah, common sense. What tools and equipment to have? This illustration is from my standard burn permit. So they want me to have a shovel and some water nearby. I prefer to have a pitchfork. Some ignition devices, the drip torch there in the top middle photo, those are really common. $150. If you're going to light a lot of piles, I highly suggest getting one of those. It makes your life easier. People also use propane torches, like the photo on the lower left. Those work well. And then, of course, pitchfork, just that's going to be your favorite tool, burning piles. But other tools you could have would be rubbing and scraping tools if you wanted to put a line around your pile to contain it. A chainsaw, you know, if you're qualified to run it, they can be handy by trimming your pile, trimming the long limbs away. And a backpack blower. That was one I just used the other day with a stubborn pile, no wind, but with that blower, it really helped encourage that pile to burn well. Also, if you're required to have water on site, a bladder bag or a backpack pump, 5 gallons of water. And something that I like to have with me is kindling. Again, for stubborn piles, throw some really dry kindling here and there just to encourage the fire to spread through your pile. And then my favorite tool, which really helps us in Humboldt, is that pig mat. It does not absorb water. It only absorbs petroleum. And so for my pile starting material, I'll tear off a few sheets of that, stuff it into the pile, and then put the drip mix on that, and then light that. And that'll burn from 5 to 10 minutes. But a little product placement going on here. But it's about, I don't know, $100 a roll for that. And that's 300 feet. And that'll last you quite a long time. So adequate resources for single and multiple piles. For single piles, again, it's one pile. This is going to be really typical for small landowners. Just basically yourself and a pitchfork and or shovel. For multiple piles, sometimes the burn permit or the smoke management plan will say specifically what you need to mitigate the smoke from your pile, if you need to have a blower or something like that. But normally I don't burn if there's any chance of escape. So I don't worry too much about digging line or anything around my pile, but if you're going to burn multiple piles, more than 4 or 5, you should really have someone there to help you. It's pretty tiring to burn more than a few piles, especially if you want to do it right and push everything in where you're only left with ash and no rings around your piles. And then, excuse me, everybody should have a hand tool for them to be able to do that. So some lessons learned for burning at home. I always call and make sure it's a burn day. Don't want your neighbors calling and complaining. And you should always have a good knowledge of your desirable winds, which wind direction to burn under. I have homes on 3 sides, and so there's really only one place I want my smoke to go. And so that's really important too. I always start a small fire, and then feed it with stacked material next to it. That way I have a lot of control over the intensity of my fire. And if the smoke is going where I don't want it to go, then I can just stop feeding it. I always cover the material I'm going to burn. burns much better when it's dry. And again, I always start my fire with kindling and then feed it with previous stacked pile. This gives me the option to stop burning if the wind changes direction and I smoke out the neighborhood, or happens more than once, or I forget there's a good soccer game on and I can just stop the burn. So that's pretty much it. Oh, I'm sorry, burning at work. So I live by this. I never burn if there's a chance of escape. I just don't do that. I want to be able to sleep at night. So in Humboldt County, that's usually not a problem. Know your weather in the area where you'll be burning. That means the day you're burning and for sure the day after. A lot of fires, escape fires have started because they did not consider the winds that they would have the following day. I only like to burn piles myself or a crew I supervised made. Boy, there's nothing worse than showing up to burn a pile and it's not something that you made. Someone else did not know how to make that pile. And then again, I have a specific kit of fire starting material I use to start my piles, which was the kindling and the pig mat, and then my drip torch. And then it helps to know how your vegetation burns. Some vegetation doesn't burn well, some burns really well. And so it's really important for you to know as you build your pile, what's going to burn well and how long maybe it needs to dry out. And then large material over 5 to 6 inches in diameter, I cut up into 4 to 5 foot lengths and I leave it outside of my pile. I stack it, maybe 10 feet or so away next on a tree or next to a tree. And then it dries out faster. And then your pile is going to be easier to start. And once that pile goes, then you can start adding the big stuff. But I like to leave it out of my pile. And then I always plan to check the piles the next day. Usually there's a lot of heat left and I want to make sure that they're safe. And then, if I have more to burn, then I can, if there's enough heat, then I'll certainly add more to it. And then a big consideration on pile location is the presence of non-native species. So I've noticed in the park burning piles that if there's Himalaya berry nearby or broom or foxglove or a lot of other invasives, that they tend to occupy your burn scar. So just be aware of that. And then show love to your air quality management district contact, because you want to build trust with them and communicate often. Invite them out to your piles or your burn site, and then maybe to the pub. And that's it. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, John, for that wonderful presentation. Since we do have a couple minutes, I would like to read some questions that our attendees have for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
The first one is from John, who asks, do you have any advice about burning dead vegetation around ponds?
Around ponds. Well, I would, I don't know what pond he's talking about, but, I'd keep a certain distance away from the pond so that you have full access around your pile. Ponds typically have berries or something that's hard to work around. So, just have it away. The pond is actually a good thing to have. You could use your water source right there. So if you had a pump, you could utilize the pond, if even a bucket or something to get water out of the pond. But I don't see the pond as being a problem myself.
Great, thank you. And then our next question is from Sherry. They ask, can burn piles be constructed on top of a stump of a removed target species that resprouts vigorously to reduce maintenance? For instance, bay trees, which come in fast and thick after fuel reduction.
That's a good question. Yeah, absolutely. Why not? You could do two things. One is you could build the pile next to the stump. And then when you want to burn that vegetation, just build the fire on the stump and then feed it, add it on top. That way you can control, again, you can control the intensity of that fire. If if that stump is punky or something and it's going to be burning a long time, that might cause you some problems. So you can either pile it on top and burn it, or you can, start a fire on the stump and then feed it. I like both methods.
Thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Heather. They say, I have a dozen completely soggy piles. What should I do with them? Any other newbie tips for what to do with piles in the summer, but can't be burned until the rainy season?
Yeah. Okay. That's happened to me many times where we didn't cover our piles. They sat for a few years and then it's like, gosh, now what do we do with them? So what I would do in that situation is I would find a strategic location amongst all those piles. And again, I would come out with some dry kindling and I would start a fire, build that fire up super, super hot with kindling and other wood that you have that's dry. And then I would just feed that fire with your soggy stuff and see how that does. I don't know how soggy they are or how long they've sat there, but you're going to have to generate a hot fire in order to burn up that wet stuff. So I would start there.
Thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Ashley. Can we appropriate ignition fluids in more detail?
Yes. So the drip torch mix that holds 1.5 gallons of mix, and the ratio is 3 parts diesel to 1 part gas. So I don't deviate from that at all. That's what I like. Some people will put a little bit more diesel in, if they want it to stick a little bit better. Some people will put a little bit more gas in if they want a little quicker, but 3 to 1 should be the ratio for any mix.
I just want to give a quick reminder to all of our attendees, please use the Q&A box instead of the chat function to ask questions. That's how we can best monitor what questions to ask our panelists. Okay, our next question comes from Theo. If I want some charcoal and not burning all to ash, how do I accomplish this? How much more smoke does this generate?
Good question. So what happens if you have larger pieces at the bottom of your pile and you burn on top of it? What happens is the smaller diameter fuel will burn usually all the way to ash and cover up the larger fuel. And so what's happening under there is it's turning to char. That larger fuel can't get oxygen, so it doesn't flame, but it does get rid of the volatile chemicals in it. And this is what I mean when I want to check my piles the next day is if you go in there with your pitchfork and lift it up, expose those big fuels, they will instantly start to flame again. So that's kind of how you make char anyway. There's plenty of information on the internet about how to make char if he's interested in that, but it's basically starving the fuel of oxygen in your pile is what's going on.
All right, our next question is from Evan. They ask, can freshly cut green material piles be burned?
I have to be careful because my air quality management district person could be on this. They would like you to burn vegetation that's cured or, a minimum of a couple of weeks to dry out. That doesn't happen very well in Humboldt County. So almost by default, in the rainy season, it's not going to have a chance to cure out. So yes, it can be done, no problem. I mean, I would never get anything done if I wasn't able to burn green material. Does it produce more smoke? It does for a while. Again, you're going to have a really hard time lighting a pile with material that you just cut, say even 2 weeks ago. So again, I would recommend starting a fire, separate fire, let that build up nice and hot, and then gradually add the green material on top and build that up.
All right. Our next comment comes from Sasha. What do you put in your drip torch mix, which I think you answered briefly? You cover your piles with, and what dimensions? So
yeah, the drip mix is 3 parts diesel, 1 part gas. You can use plastic to cover your pile. I recommend something at least 6 millimeter thickness, which you can get at a hardware store. Stay away from the 4 millimeter. That's kind of a one-time use. You can use paper, like a wax paper, waxy, to keep the water out. That only lasts for maybe 3 or 4 months. It's okay. Certainly the air quality, people like that over plastic. But using the really thick 6 millimeter plastic, you can cover your pile, and then when you want to burn it, a lot of times you can just remove it. It just pull it off your pile, and then you can reuse it because it's so thick. So I like plastic.
All right. We have a couple other questions. One from Ray. What do you say about burning large amounts of stumps? So stumps that have been piled, not in the ground.
Well, it really comes down to the type of burn permit you have. For a homeowner, like the standard permit, I'm supposed to cease burning by noon. So I can go from 6 o'clock to noon. And the only way I'm going to be able to achieve that is to burn smaller diameter stuff. So if you're on a big ranch or have a large piece of property and you have a non-standard permit, you may be allowed to generate smoke and to have that pile burn hot for, multiple days. But if those stumps are available to burn, they're going to burn for a long, long time. And I would, once you get them going, I would probably put a backpack blower, some wind on it to try to really get it to consume quickly and not just smolder. But it really comes down to your permit and what's allowed in your air district.
Great. And then someone else asked if you should be concerned about when you're burning stumps, the fire traveling through the root system and escaping that way.
Yeah, good question. That's certainly a consideration. I stay away from stumps. I stay away from punky logs. Even if the stumps and logs seem to be wet, they are just a harbor of ember wash, and they will keep embers going through it until they start. And you come back the next day, and now you've got something spreading through the duff layer. I don't like any of that. I just try to stay away from all that. And they will go down the roots. Ask someone at Yosemite or Sequoia if they've ever had, a fire start underneath the road and on the other side.
All right, so we have 2 more questions from Ron. How many feet do you need to be away from other trees and vegetation if you don't want them to burn? And then what considerations do you have for burning on steep hills?
Yeah, good questions. I would tell the crews building piles for us, stay at least 10 feet away from the bole of any leaf trees. But that really comes down to the size of the piles. And then if it's a windy day, 10 feet may not be enough because the flames are curling over towards the tree. So it's going to depend. And then the second part of the question, I just completely forgot.
Okay. What considerations do you have for burning on steep hills?
Steep hills. Yeah. Great question. I tend to exceed my 6-foot length sometimes because the steeper the slope, sometimes the longer the debris parallel with the slope you want to keep it from rolling. So if there's material below your pile you don't want to catch on fire, then you may have to build a little cup trench underneath your pile to catch rolling material off your pile. So but if you burn with no chance of escape, meaning no vegetation around the pile can burn, then that wouldn't be necessary to build a cup trench. But yeah, steep slopes, they're good. Things consume well on steep slopes. It's going to be a little more fatiguing to deal with your pile.
And then one last question, or just to confirm, what does punky mean?
Punky, it's like partially decomposed material, woody material. If you go up to a log and you can actually scrape some of the fibers and kind of squish it like a sponge in your hand, that would be kind of punky. Punky wood is very receptive to embers.